Hi, my name is Annette Jones, and my class presentation is on the topic of using race-based versus class-based affirmative action in admitting students to college. The title of the article that I'm doing my class presentation on is Race-Based versus Class-Based Affirmative Action in College Admissions, and below you can see the citation of the article. The first key concept noted in the article discusses how affirmative action is now under attack. Some argue that racism is no longer a problem. In fact, they feel that using race-based processes is inappropriate. They also feel that reaching the goal of a colorblind society will not take place by continuing to use race-based policies. There have been some court case decisions suggesting that race-based scholarships and admission policies may be unconstitutional. So we find that because of the controversy regarding race-based policies, some institutions, in fact, are moving away from using these policies and moving towards programs based on alternative definitions of disadvantaged populations. There is an argument for the need of some sort of affirmative action program with a broader definition of disadvantage. It seems to be a focus more on socioeconomic status variables rather than race. One such proposal for alternative definition is for class-based affirmative action policies. Some see these as a fair process, supports overall goal of colorblind society and college admission. They feel it to be more politically correct, and it's a means to reaching similar ends. The purpose of the article is to attempt to simulate the impact of moving from a race-based to class-based affirmative action program. In the article, the author addresses two questions. The first is class-based affirmative action just another means to the same end? And the second is how would eligibility for class-based affirmative action be determined, and what are the implications for administration of such a program? To simulate the impact of moving from race-based to class-based affirmative action in college admission, the author uses data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. This database of youth contains over 4,000 youths for whom information on family income and living arrangements are collected. The author had to consider how an individual's socioeconomic status or class is to be determined. If affirmative action programs depend on individuals' membership in a disadvantaged category or group, two issues need to be considered. The first is that eligibility should be based on factors that can be independently verified. For example, family income may be verified using tax returns. However, family background, when you're looking at things such as family dysfunction, instability, or substance abuse, these factors may be difficult to assess or verify. The second issue that comes into play for the potential for affirmative action eligibility standards is that they sometimes affect incentives. Some people may be encouraged because of incentives to identify themselves with a particular category in order to qualify for the incentives. For example, if students receive incentives for attending a school particular school that meets the criteria, their parents may consider leaving them in that school in order to qualify for that disadvantaged category. The author noted that in matters of race-based affirmative action programs, the criteria for race or ethnicity is limited. And what that means is you are born into the race. You can't distort that information. However, criteria such as family structure, residence, family income, or school quality may be altered. These are sometimes by choice and can be changed over time. The author used the following verifiable criteria to base eligibility for class-based affirmative action for this analysis. Youth were classified according to whether they always, sometimes, or never live in poverty from age 15 to 17, whether they ever live with a parent who had at least a high school diploma or a college diploma, and whether they always, sometimes, or never live with both biological parents from age 15 to 17. Among the sample group and verifiable definitions, the author pays particular attention to address that the sample used for primary analysis is limited to youths with scores above the 20th percentile on the Armed Force Qualification Test. She finds that 12% of non-minority and 45% of minority youth scores are below the cutoff results for the sample with scores at or above the 40th percentile. And that's all just to show that the percentages end up being different when you use class-based processes. The results, these are some of the percentage of the results in the analysis. The percentage of minority youth who lived in families with incomes below the poverty line in each year from the age of 15 to 17 was only 15%. Minority youth who lived in families that were poor in at least 1 year was 48%. Minority youth with scores at or above the 20th percentile who never lived with a parent with at least a high school diploma was 43%. A minority youth who never lived with both biological parents between the age of 15 and 17 was 41%. So as you can see from the results, the proportion of minority youth qualifying for programs based on socioeconomic disadvantage would vary with the criteria used. Categories such as poverty, status resident parents, education, and family structure revealed that many minority youth would not be eligible for class-based affirmative action. The answers to the questions that the author proposed represent that these results show that class-based affirmative action will result in substantially different pools of eligible individuals than race-based programs. The selection criteria will not allow all minority students to qualify. Even though racial and ethnic minorities are overrepresented among the socioeconomic disadvantaged, class-based programs are unlikely to achieve the same answers as race-based programs. Class-based affirmative action may also be difficult to implement and justify if alternative definitions of disadvantage result in very different pools of eligible people. So as you can see, when you use race-based affirmative action processes, 100% of those eligible for programs targeted racial minorities are eligible. When you use class-based, the percentages will vary based on the criteria. The implications for this is that developing criteria by which to identify disadvantaged youth raises questions about the feasibility of class-based approaches. This article is important in understanding the need to continue to use affirmative action policies to ensure that underrepresented populations have equal access to education opportunities and are able to use their talents and abilities to contribute to society. The article is very important in allowing those who argue that class-based affirmative action is a means to the same end as race-based affirmative action is not true. When using class-based affirmative action policies, the criteria used for selection measures the results in different pools of eligible students. Thus, the percentages of minority students who qualify for those class-based scholarships and/or admissions will be different. However, with race-based processes, all students, 100% of the students who qualify would be eligible. When higher ed officials choose to use class-based programs, they must pay attention to what criteria is used in the selection of students. Excuse me. The two affirmative action policy debate issues noted were those who would choose to eliminate programs based on race and ethnicity versus those who choose to replace affirmative action policies with alternative definitions of disadvantage using such processes as class-based affirmative action policies. Supporters of getting rid of affirmative action policies feel that there is no longer a need in our society to support such systems. They feel that reaching a colorblind society is not possible by using affirmative action policies, specifically race-based policies. So the pros of race-based policies is that you're born into it, and those things cannot be altered, so they're narrowly defined. The cons for race-based programs is that they appear unconstitutional, ethnical, and racially based. However, there are those who still see the need of affirmative action, but conclude there needs to be alternative definitions to disadvantaged populations. They propose categories is based on class-based affirmative action policies, and in which socioeconomic status is the focus. These supporters conclude that class-based affirmative action would lead to similar results as race-based affirmative action. The pros being for class-based programs is that they're more politically palatable and they appear to be fair. The cons that they're broadly defined, race or ethnicity is not a factor, and there's a potential for strategic misrepresentation. This concludes my presentation about the article Race-Based versus Class-Based Affirmative Action in College Admission. My last slide are the 3 questions for the discussion post. The first question, in the article, the argument that racism no longer matters. Do you agree or disagree with this thought? Why or why not? Number 2, what are your thoughts about moving from a race-based affirmative policy to a class-based affirmative policy and its effect in ensuring a diverse population on college campuses? Number 3, if you were tasked with creating a class-based program, what criteria do you feel would be most important in the selection process? Thank you, and I look forward to reading your responses.